Hello, my name is Frank Chance, and I'm an art historian at the University of Pennsylvania. I want to talk to you today about Hokkaido and its culture and its history. Um, I will be accompanying you on the Foreign Policy Research Institute study tour to Japan this summer and look forward to enjoying Hokkaido with all of you. Hokkaido, of course, is the northernmost of the four main islands of Japan. It nestles between the Pacific Ocean on its south and east, the Sea of Okhotsk to its north, and the Sea of Japan, what the Koreans call the East Sea, on its western side. The island of Hokkaido is connected to the main islands of Japan not only by ferries and airplanes, but also by an undersea tunnel linking the southernmost point of the island with the northernmost point of the main island of Japan. Through that tunnel, both trains and cars can pass. The island has a spine of mountains running north to south up the middle of it, flatter areas on both sides of that, and of course near the seacoast. The major cities include Sapporo, centrally located, Hakodate, the nearest port to the main island of Japan, Asahikawa up in the mountains, Muroran, another port city, Obihiro on the other plain to the east of Sapporo, Kushiro, port city on the Pacific coast, and of course Chitose, where the airport is, where we'll be landing, and Shiraoi Poroto, the Ainu reconstructed village that we'll be visiting as well. The Hokkaido timeline would begin about 12,000 years ago when people who we now know as the Jomon people began to settle in the northern island. These people were hunters and gatherers living off the land, and we do know that they made a certain amount of pottery, but they stopped making pottery and began to diverge from the main population of Japan in around the 3rd or 4th century before the Common Era. The first contact recorded between the people of Honshu, mainland Japan, and the people in Hokkaido is probably that of Abe no Hirafu, who contacted people he called the Emishi at a place he called Watarishima. There was peaceful contact between the Ezo people of Hokkaido and northern Honshu for centuries thereafter. Trade went back and forth, but it was mostly peaceful contact until the 15th century when conflict broke out. And a man of Honshu named Takeda Nobuhiro killed the Ainu leader Ko Shamain in an armed conflict. Takeda's followers and successors in the Matsumai clan controlled trade throughout northern Japan through the year 1868 and were de facto rulers of Hokkaido, although the Ainu maintained a certain amount of autonomy underneath them. There were occasional rebellions when the Ainu people tried to get rid of the Matsumai, but they continually failed, probably primarily because the mainland Japanese had much better weapons using metal and steel. In 1869, Shakushain, an Ainu leader, started a rebellion, but it failed and ended in his death. Again, in 1789, Minashi and Kunashir, two leaders, tried to rebel against the Matsumai, but again it failed. And the Ainu were never successful in maintaining autonomy after that. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration took away the power of the Matsumai and replaced it with a government commission devoted to developing the frontier of Hokkaido. Kaitakushi literally means the pioneer government. And they first introduced the name of Hokkaido, dividing it into 11 provinces for governmental purposes. In 1889, that was reorganized into 3 sub-prefectures. Both those original provinces and the 3 sub-prefectures survive today as administrative units underneath the government of Hokkaido. July of 1945, the United States attacked the southern coast of Hokkaido with bombing raids, but it didn't penetrate very far in, which leaves most of Hokkaido's older buildings intact, rather than the destruction that was wreaked on Tokyo, Osaka, and even northern cities like Sendai. After the war, the prefecture was given its autonomy for the first time in 1847, and that autonomy continues to the present day, although there is still an effort on the part of the main government of Japan to develop Hokkaido's resources more fully. Of course, there are multiple narratives of this history of Hokkaido, as there are in many other parts of the world. On the one hand, the colonists' narrative of frontier development and modernization is the dominant narrative even today. On the other hand, the colonized native people have a narrative of being the natural residents who were conquered by outsiders coming in and invading their territory. Let's start with that narrative and then look at the colonist narrative later. The Ainu people were depicted by mainland Japanese both in paintings from the early period and photographs once that technology became available. Ainu isn't really a very good word for them. In their own language, it simply means human as opposed to of the gods or of the animal realm. Better word might be utari, meaning comrade, a word that unites all the people of Hokkaido, whatever tribe they are from, and whatever group they belong to. Their photographs include men and women and look somewhat strikingly different from mainland Japanese. They also served as a living exhibit in a number of foreign exhibitions. For example, the 1910 exhibition at the British Museum, which provides us with early photographs of these people and their rituals and their dress. You'll notice that they have a lot of hair, long beards and mustaches on the men, for example, that make them look rather different from most Japanese. On the other hand, if they shave or if they're female, the Ainu look just about like other Japanese people. Wearing a business suit, you can't tell them from ordinary Japanese. The Ainu people are, of course, related to the Japanese closely, genetically and culturally. They began to diverge around the 3rd century before the Common Era. The Jomon culture spread all the way from the southern part of Japan up to Hokkaido, but beginning around the 3rd century, there started to be a migration from the mainland onto the main islands of Japan that changed the culture there. The influences from the continent made that culture diverge from that of the Ainu people, who stopped making pottery and began to live and continued to live off the land as hunters and gatherers for much longer than the population in the main line of Japan. Cultural imports to the main islands of Japan also included rice agriculture and metal smelting, as well as physical immigrants coming in and changing the genetic makeup of the mainline Japanese people as well. The Ainu population is diminishing. It's fairly small. There are many Ainu who are hidden. They don't necessarily take pride in their culture and advertise it to everyone they know. But by estimates from around the year 1999, we can see that the largest majority of Ainu people live in the southern coast uh, around Muroran and that area. Utari, as a word of address, goes back a long way, back to the Edo period, but was pretty much ignored by the Japanese main islanders. The villages survived right up through the 20th century, as other parts of Japan were developed, of Hokkaido were developed by the Japanese from Honshu. The survivals were mostly in villages known as kotan. For example, Nibutani Kotan up in the northern part, or Poroto Kotan near the town of Shiraoi, where we'll be visiting. These are images from Nibutani, showing it in the snow, which is a frequent visitor to Hokkaido. And another village house recreated within the historical museum in Sapporo. To some extent, Ainu culture has become a kind of tourist attraction for people from other parts of Japan, as well as few people surviving who practice and live as Ainu. The Ainu people worshipped what they called kamui, clearly related to the Japanese word kami for gods or spiritual forces. And their spiritual forces included bears, salmon, and whales, as well as such natural phenomena as wind, rain, thunder, and lightning. They worshiped them with carved sticks, and by capturing a young bear and keeping it for a year and then sacrificing it in a festival of bear meat. Lacquer and metals were imported from the mainland islands of Japan by trade, sometimes even including lacquer that was made specially to order for Ainu chieftains, like this kami ikupui and bowl used for Ainu ritual. Other materials, such as these large cases or buckets, were brought in and traded from the Japanese, and then treated as though they were very special items, treasures that were kept by each family. We'll be visiting Shiraoi Poroto Kotan, village that's kind of a Disneyland style recreation of an Ainu village. People don't actually live there, but they recreate the style of Ainu practice. The houses were made mostly of thatch and include not only individual dwellings, but also communal longhouses where rituals could be performed, including dance, music, and storytelling. At Shiraoi, there's also an Ainu historical museum where we'll try to talk to some members of the community as well. Ainu music is different from mainland Japanese music. The main instruments are a mukuri, it's like a jaw harp, but made of bamboo, and the tonkori, a vertical plucked stringed instrument with a sounding board. Music was influential to a number of Japanese composers, including Akira Ifukube, composer of many Japanese film scores. Other music includes songs such as lullabies and other songs performed by Ainu women at the village, and dances, both communal dances and performative dances like this crane dance. If we're lucky, we'll be able to see some of that performance when we visit Shiraoi. We'll also be able to see and probably purchase Ainu handicraft, both wood carvings and painted leather, shaved wood uh, based on the original Kamui uh, sacrifice and worship devices. There's also a tradition of very particular Ainu design in weaving, dyeing, and embroidery. It may remind you of Northwest American coastal native cut art and design as well. We'll also meet, if we're lucky, wood carvers, and certainly we'll see things like bears. The bear with a salmon is a particularly interesting image. Having been introduced from Switzerland around 1920, it's become a real symbol of Hokkaido, even though it's not something that the Ainu people were making before the 20th century. It's been adapted along with other natural imagery like owls for tourist art, some of it quite lovely and interesting. But of course, there was also a long tradition of Ainu wood carving and decoration before that. For example, these ikapusui ritual wands used in the rituals to the kamui are a form that continues to be made today and you might find for sale. We have examples of these from as early as the 16th century. They're often they were called by early ethnographers mustache lifters because they saw the long mustaches and beards of the Ainu men and thought these were used to keep their mustaches out of their soup. That's not at all what they were actually used for, but it's an interesting name and hopefully it'll make you remember them. We'll try to set up an appointment to visit the Utari Kyokai and talk to the organizers of the Ainu people working today to seek rights for the Ainu, Emishi, and other indigenous people of Japan. Okay, now we'll shift to the colonizers' narrative, beginning with a discussion of the Matsumai domain, which de facto was the rulers of Hokkaido from 1479 until 1868. Matsumai were fairly good to the Ainu, allowing them to keep their own customs, although they were wringing tribute out of them and not always treating them very nicely. For example, you can see this Ainu man brought in to give tribute to the Matsumai clan in a traditional ceremony preserved in a manuscript at the Hakodate Regional Library. After 1868, however, it all changes. Hokkaido becomes the frontier to be developed and modernized by people from the main part of Japan. They took away the right of the Ainu to speak their own language and to be educated like Japanese from the main part of the islands, and began to build more and more permanent buildings, both in a wooden style reminiscent of Northern Europe, as we see in the clock tower that's become a symbol of the city of Sapporo, built in 1878. Or the former Hokkaido government office, now a historic museum that introduces the history of the prefecture in central Sapporo. This building was built in 1879 as well to replace the previous offices that burned down. It's beautiful brickwork, a lovely building from the 19th century. There are modern buildings as well. If we will go out to the suburbs of Sapporo to visit the Kaitaku Kinenkan, the Pioneer Museum, in a modern building right next to the Kaitaku no Mura, the Pioneer Village, where buildings that have been recreated or preserved from the Meiji period are gathered together. So this narrative of modernization and development begins in 1868, gets serious in the 1870s, and continues through around the time of World War II, really. The Meiji oligarchs began a systematic colonization and development of fishery and agriculture. So we not only see their the recreation of the original prefectural offices here, but also things like brick police boxes, uh, houses and families, customs of the old days, all recreated with a bit of a Disneyland mood here at Kaitaku no Mura. This is the old fish factory, recreated, actually transplanted from another site along the coast and brought there. There are also things like school buildings, shops and stores from the Meiji period that were brought there from Sapporo. There's even a farm from the 1920s that could fool you into thinking you were in Ohio if you didn't know better. Hokkaido fared rather well during the 1920s and 30s as colonization spread from Hokkaido to Korea and Manchuria. Colonizers who had trained in Hokkaido went off to mainland Asia to spread the Japanese empire, as in this example from around 1929. One of the important things that developed was the use of the natural resources available in Hokkaido to make such Western beverages as beer and whiskey. The original Sapporo beer factory has been preserved as a restaurant today and is one of the ways that the resources of Hokkaido, particularly rich in grains like wheat and hops, were used and converted into products that could be sold throughout Japan. That was not only true of beer, but also of the first Japanese development of whiskey. The narrative of that was presented to the Japanese people in slightly fictionalized form in a morning drama presented for 15 minutes each weekday morning from September of 2014 through March of 2015 in the morning drama called Mas-san. It's the story of the man who developed that first whiskey in Japan and his love for a Scottish girl and Scottish drinks as well, playing out between around 1920 and around 1950 or so. We'll visit the site where they filmed some of that story in Yoichi, a town name that shares its name with the brand name of a prize-winning Japanese whiskey today. We'll also try to visit a couple of schools. In the past, I've visited Hokusei Gakuen Girls High School and hope that we can go there again. There are some buildings that survive from the creation of that school as Smith College and then Smith School for Girls. The name was then changed to Hokusei, in other words, Northern Star School for Girls in 1894. A few of the old buildings survive, but of course classes today are taught in new updated classrooms and buildings. We'll try to visit there and see some of the classes just to see what Japanese education looks like. If we have enough time, we'll also visit some contemporary architecture in Hokkaido, perhaps the most dramatic example of which is the Sapporo Dome, built for the 2002 World Cup and used today as both a baseball and a soccer stadium. The baseball stadium is the artificial turf of the interior of the building. And there's also a soccer field of natural turf that is moved outside on an air cushion to grow and then brought into the domed stadium during games only. There's a very unique kind of decoration around the building. If you look at the various parts from a random angle, it doesn't look like anything. But if you stand in just the right place, you can see, for example, a demon mask inspiring the local soccer team to crazy greatness. It's a beautiful building, decorated with art all around. Each of the glass windows points in appropriate directions to the teams that played in the World Cup and their home cities. There's also a wind-driven sculpture just outside the building that may be reminiscent of the wind turbines on top of our own Lincoln Financial Field here in Philadelphia. Well, unfortunately, one of the things we won't get to see is the annual Sapporo Snow Festival, held in February each year. For that festival, they build huge structures of ice and snow, from Japanese castles or European buildings to, from just a few years ago, the Taj Mahal recreated in pure snow and ice. That is also played out with sports and other events that happen throughout the month of February. And then, of course, as the spring comes, all of those buildings, all of those sculptures melt down into water, only to be recreated again the next year in different style and with different buildings. Well, I hope that's given you a sense of what it's like to enjoy Hokkaido, what we can look forward to seeing while we're there, and learning from it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them by email. My email, the best one to reach me at is chancefl@sas.upenn.edu, chancefl@sas.upenn.edu. I look forward to seeing all of you soon and hope you have a good day.